I've said many, many times over the last year that we all have agency in defending our democracy, all of us. Whatever our station in life happens to be, we all have a responsibility to speak out, peacefully make our voices heard, and assist our fellow Washingtonians. We will not allow this administration to turn our nation into an authoritarian regime. That is not our America, and we will not allow this administration to change that. With that, I'm going to turn to Attorney General Brown, who, of course, is doing fantastic work in regards to many issues. I particularly appreciate his hard work on really helping to lead the country, on holding this administration to the rule of law. And, of course, he has a fantastic team, and it was a pleasure to see many of them this morning as well. Attorney General Nick Brown.
Thank you, Governor. I come to the microphone this morning as one of many Washingtonians struggling to process the recent events in Minnesota, asking myself and talking to my family about what it means for my neighbors and for my state. I also come to the microphone with years of experience working with the federal government and spending much of my career as a law enforcement officer with the Department of Justice, trying to do everything I can to keep Washingtonians safe. And I know that right now, Minnesota is less safe because of the federal presence in that state. America is weaker because of the operations in Minnesota. And real people all across this country are now traumatized, injured, and dead because of this president's fascist tendencies. What we're seeing right now coming from Washington, D.C. is motivated by hate and bias, and it is guided by the whims of the president, not the facts, not the courts, and certainly not the United States Constitution. This violence has widely been met with Minnesotans' love of their community and not hate or harm. And the vast majority of people that you see in the streets in Minnesota, they're not radicals. They are everyday people who are coming out to support their community, pouring out into the freezing cold in Minnesota to support one another. For anyone across the country, anyone in this state, no matter your background, no matter your political party, no matter how much you've been paying attention, if you are not horrified by what we've been seeing from federal agents in Minnesota, shooting a man on the ground, shooting a woman in her car, kicking down doors without warrants, jailing clergy, arresting children, I just have to pray that anyone not outraged by this, that they will come through the fog of lies from this administration, that they will come out of this institutionalized lawfulness. This may be the authoritarian America that Donald Trump wants. Indeed, I think it is exactly what he wants. But I do not believe that this is why the majority of voters put Donald Trump back into the White House. I refuse to accept that such a reductive and deceitful excuse for the erosion of our civil rights is acceptable. For the president to keep getting away with this, he needs America to stay divided. He needs America to be scared. He needs Congress to be paralyzed, and he needs the Supreme Court to stay pliant. Other branches of government do not get a free pass here, not when the executive branch is governing by fear. We need the full voice of the people and other branches of the government to rein it in. The ICE memorandum that the governor spoke of mentioned that it basically instructs agents to ignore the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, to throw it in the trash. That represents a constitutional crisis at the level of everything the founders of this country warned us against, warning us against the tyranny that could arise if we put our heads in the sand. Checks and balances are more essential than ever if we want America that is both governed fairly and policed fairly. Judges sign warrants as a neutral party. ICE is not a neutral party, and it has no oversight today. These masked federal agents who roam the streets of Minneapolis have usurped the role of judges and flagrantly violating the Fourth Amendment. The Constitution protects our homes from the kind of invasion by law enforcement because the founders had lived under a royal government that abused its authority. But the Fourth Amendment prohibits the unreasonable searches and requires warrants based on probable cause because our homes are sacred. The president campaigned last year, or in 2024, on targeting the worst of the worst. But there are tens of thousands of arrests that show this has not been the case at all. If you're going to go after the worst of the worst, you don't target parents dropping their kids off at their preschools. You don't go to hospitals. You don't go to places of worship. And you sure as hell don't use children as bait. You don't go to job sites daily or lay in the wait for people to show up to take their citizenship test. They do not care what the Constitution has to say about the limits of their authority. The president certainly has no inclination to abide by the Constitution. He is doing whatever he wants to people because he believes he has the power to do that. Last spring, I talked about what we were seeing early in the administration as seeing elements of fascism, and yet I am still surprised. And what shocks me most is the lies coming from the president and his team, and the contempt for the idea of finding some humanity and some effort to unite this country. That is because the president and everyone around him seems to relish in degrading people. They're having fun, holed up on compounds and resorts, toasting each other, naming buildings after one another, accepting somebody else's Nobel Prize, and cheating in golf. Everything but governing. They seem utterly disconnected from the real world and the consequences of everyone outside their little cabal of cruelty. People have asked what we can do if ICE descends on Washington State, as they have in Minnesota. And I will not speculate on our strategy. I'm not going to hand our playbook to them. But I can tell you that my staff, working closely with Governor Ferguson, have monitored the situation in Minnesota and Minneapolis very, very closely. We are very well aware of the litigation filed by the state and local governments there. We speak with our colleagues in Minnesota AG's office on a regular basis. We have also been in touch with immigration and advocate voices since day one to track the federal actions that are going on in our community. And you should all know by now that when we can and do, we move quickly on the legal front when the civil rights of Washingtonians are being threatened. The people of this state can be assured that if we see this happening on our streets and in our neighborhoods, we will do everything within our authority to stop it. I also just want to speak how exhausted the public feels right now because of the unrelenting inhumanity coming from this administration. We need the public's help. We need to be people to understand that this is just a point in time in American history. We do not need to abandon our principles and that we will see better days. Those of us who care about the Constitution must also resist the urge to merely hunker down and try to survive these next few years. Instead, we must be persistent. We must pursue every action that we can at a state and local level to push back. We must advance some of the measures that this legislature is considering, including the ones that Governor Ferguson mentioned. I'm particularly mindful of our legislation, the Immigrant Worker Protection Act, which will put workers on equal ground with their employers and give them notice of when ICE comes to their workplace to try to raid their workplaces. Perhaps Thurgood Marshall put it best more than 30 years ago when he said, "We must dissent from the indifference. We must dissent from the apathy. We must dissent from the fear and the hatred and the mistrust. We must dissent from the poverty of vision and the absence of moral leadership. We must dissent because America can do better, because America has no choice but to do better." Thank you again.
Thank you, Attorney General Brown. Thanks again to all of you for being here, and we're happy to answer any questions that individuals have. Yes.
Governor, you said that you would use every legal option available to both federal government as well as individual. Talk about that, elaborate on what some of those legal options are that you could do in a scenario like.
You know, the Attorney General may want to weigh in, but I think the Attorney General said it well when he said he doesn't want to lay out the playbook for the federal administration. That's a perspective I had as well as Attorney General, which makes sense when you're dealing with this administration. What I will say, and then the Attorney General may want to add to that, is, I think one reason why Washington State has done exceptionally well at holding the administration accountable this term and the previous one is everybody works hard to anticipate what might be happening. We don't simply wait around for an event to happen. We try to anticipate that, do a lot of legal research in anticipation, sometimes even drafting complaints before something actually happens. So we're not just ready, but we're ready to actually act right away. And so what I can say is, the Attorney General and I are having conversations about this. Our teams are coordinated, and we're preparing for a range of potential actions by the federal government. There are some circumstances where we can't file a lawsuit, right? That's the nature of the law sometimes. But I think it's certainly fair to say that if in the judgment of the Attorney General that we have the legal ability to challenge what's going on, we're not shy about doing that. That is an understatement. And they don't just do that, they're literally leading the nation as we have in the past. So again, I don't want to get into details about that. I'll let the Attorney General add anything he might want to that question.
Thank you, Governor. Yeah, what I would say is that if we can take action, we will. We certainly don't know what our legal actions or options will be because we do not know what the federal government will do here. What we have seen thus far is truly unprecedented in the way that they have approached and abused their federal authority, the way that they ignore court orders, the way that they seem to disregard the Fourth Amendment. But we will be prepared to respond to anything that happens here in which we can intervene and act on behalf of the people of Washington State. The other thing I would say about what's happening in Minnesota is it's not happening in a vacuum. The reason that the president feels so comfortable violating the United States Constitution is because since day one, he has been acting that way and Congress has let it pass. From the beginning, Congress has really been scared, fearful, in hiding to push back against this president. And he can act with disregard for our Constitution today because of what happened a year ago. Because from day one, he started with violating the United States Constitution by signing an executive order to try to end birthright citizenship. What has been so important over the last year is to try to push back against that. That is why we've been involved in 50 lawsuits to date, because we need and we understand that in order to prevent and do everything we can to mitigate the harms like we're seeing in Minnesota, we need to push back against every single thing that is unlawful and simply not look away and accept it as normal. And I've been so proud to work with my colleagues across the country and other states. As I said earlier, we've been in really close contact recently with Minnesota to understand and support what they're doing. And if that happens in Washington State, we will be prepared to respond just like Minnesota has responded.
Governor, you mentioned you don't have the ability to keep the ICE agents out, but you're hoping that the legislation can control what they do.
Yes.
On the facial coverings, realistically, do you think that would be something they would follow? And if they didn't, what authority would the state have to enforce that?
Yeah, our job would be to take them to court and judges would determine that. So we're not going to be shy about that. We've worked hard on crafting that legislation, on working with the legislature. I think it's extremely important. I said in my remarks, you know, it's, I mean, if you stop and think about it for a moment, in the United States, federal agents are roaming around with masks. I mean, it's third world country stuff, right? It is. And I realize it gets normalized. You see it, and there's some sense of seeing it, and you kind of get used to it, but we just can't get used to that. And so that's why I appreciate the legislature moving quickly on this. We need to make a statement about this. That's not going to happen in Washington State. And we are certainly ready to defend that law if it's challenged by anybody. So I think it's an extremely important piece of legislation. And, you know, these ICE agents, you know, at least have the guts to show your face.
We just heard from officials in